Garrett Bradbury will be a downgrade from what the Chicago Bears had last season with Drew Dalman, but I still think the trade for the veteran center was a smart move by Ryan Poles.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. On the show today, we're going to break down the Chicago Bears trade for Garrett Bradbury and how he fits in the center rankings, as far as the quality of what the Bears have now versus what they had and what their other alternatives were, and why even, giving him a fifth-round pickup for him, I think is a smart move by Ryan Poles. It's not like, some genius move that, no one ever saw coming, but still I think a subtle, important, valuable move that ultimately isn't super high risk and could pay off nicely for the Chicago Bears. We'll also take a look at Tremaine Edmunds' release, not getting traded after all, and what impact this is all having on the Bears' salary cap space now as free agency opens. And we'll talk about them not trading for Max Crosby, instead seeing him go to the Baltimore Ravens for 2 first-round picks. I do want to thank you for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. But we start with the Garrett Bradbury trade. The Bears lose Drew Dalman to retirement and quickly turn around and go get a veteran center via trade from the New England Patriots, sending a 5th-round pick their way for Bradbury, who's not well regarded like one of the better centers in the NFL and is definitely a downgrade from Drew Dalman, but also costs significantly less and gives the Bears some reliable stability at center, even if it has flaws and will come with some ups and downs. I think the smart aspect of this for Poles is in the timing and the compensation more so than Bradbury being some great player who's going to, totally shore up the interior of your offensive line. Bradbury has struggled. He struggled with the Minnesota Vikings. He was up and down this year with the Patriots. He's not going to come in and be a lockdown center who doesn't make any mistakes or give up a sack here or there. Although technically he didn't give up a sack in the regular season. He gave up a couple in the playoffs for the Patriots. But I think first and foremost for Garrett Bradbury, he is an Iron Man type of player. He does not miss time. He has not dealt with injuries. He has been durable, reliable, and out there at all times. And so was Drew Dalman this past season. But still, I think when it comes to offensive linemen, right, you want to have a guy that you trust for just stability to be there so that the quarterback is taking snaps from the same center all season long and doesn't have to alternate between different guys, and then different guys calling out the protections and handling things, the leadership from the middle of the offensive line. This trade for Bradbury gives you someone who you can count on being there. This is also a center who just spent a whole season doing all of that leadership, protections, etc., for a young quarterback in New England, right? He's been through this process and knows how to support a young quarterback's development from a protections and making calls at the line of scrimmage type of opportunities and snap counts, right? And learning the cadence and getting on the same page. That kind of relationship and connection is going to be really important. And then also I think Garrett Bradbury is a good scheme fit for Ben Johnson's running game in particular. I think he is a better run blocker than pass blocker, but I think he was a little better even this season in pass protection than he had been earlier in his career. And I think at the center position in particular, I think it's a little bit less important to be a perfect pass blocker than guard or tackle, just because center is the position where you have the fewest one-on-one pass blocking reps. Sometimes it happens, if there's a 5-man rush, a center's got to be one-on-one, but in a 4-man rush, the center is almost always double teaming with one of the 2 guards. Rarely is the center left one-on-one in pass protection. So if there's a position on the offensive line where run blocking matters a little bit more than pass blocking, or where pass blocking matters less than the other positions, it's probably the center spot. That's not to say, obviously, pressure right up the middle is a big problem, and if he's not picking up blitzers or passing off stunts properly, that's a real issue. But I think you can hide pass protection issues at center a little bit easier with double teams as opposed to, guard or tackle where, you have to really like bring in a tight end or a running back to kind of mask some of those other things. I also think he wasn't that horrendous in pass protection. Like, it's not great, but like if you compare it to some of the other centers that we've talked about this offseason, and he's right there, at least this past season, among the guys we were discussing. So if you look at how many pressures Garrett Bradbury gave up, that's sacks, hits, and hurries. If you take the number of pressures he gave up divided by the number of pass blocking snaps, it would be essentially you're measuring the rate of pressure he gave out. How often, when he was pass blocking, did he give up a sack, hit, or a hurry? This past season, Garrett Bradbury went ranked 22nd in pressure rate, which that number doesn't sound good, right? 22nd out of, you think 32 starting centers. I think there are about 40 centers that played at least 150 pass blocking snaps. Nonetheless, he is average across all centers in the NFL in terms of pressure rate allowed, ranking 22nd. It was about 3.3%. But for comparison, Drew Dalman this past season ranked 25th in pressure rate at 3.7%. Or veteran free agent Tyler Biadasz, who there was some Bears connections to before he just signed with somebody. I don't even remember what team Tyler Biadasz signed with, but he just signed a big contract elsewhere. He ranked 27th. And even everybody's golden boy, Tyler Linderbaum, gave up more pressures and a higher pressure rate than Garrett Bradbury. He ranked 36th among all centers in pressure rate this past season, 5.2%. Garrett Bradbury was at 3.3%. So it's not quite double the rate of pressure allowed. And I'm not here to say Bradbury is great by any means. He ranked 22nd here. Like, Connor McGovern from the Bills, who just re-signed on a big deal, he ranked 11th. And Creed Humphrey was number one for the Chiefs. He gave up pressure at 1.2% this season. I mean, that's top tier stuff. Like, Bradbury is still 3 times worse than the best center in terms of pressure rate, but it's not horrendous, right? It's not a complete turnstile this past season. I would evaluate his pass protection this way. There's going to be times when he gets beat and you get a little frustrated. And maybe it seems like maybe one frustrating pass protection type play per game on average. Does that mean some games there'll be 0? Some games there'll be 2, but so it's going to be like every once in a while, he might give up a hurry or a hit or a sack, and you're like, that was too easy. You need Bradbury to be better there for sure. But on the most part, he'll get by in pass protection. I don't think we need to panic about him being some huge massive, he'll be the weak link on the offensive line, well, depending on the left tackle situation, I guess. But it's not like some massive liability that's going to ruin your game plan every single week. On top of that, Bradbury is an ideal fit in Ben Johnson's running game. Ben Johnson's outside zone scheme asks a lot of the same things of the center that Kevin O'Connell's running game did in Minnesota when he was there for a number of years, and he blocked those zone runs very well there. The Patriots had him do more gap scheme stuff and downhill inside zone stuff that he's also fine at. Like, he's got some versatility in that regard, but I do think Ben Johnson needs a specific type of athlete who can get out in space as a run blocking center, and Bradbury will fit that nicely. And I think I'm not going to say that's more important than the pass protection, because I still think pass pro and Caleb Williams is always going to be most important. But I think for Ben Johnson, I think that's why he and Ryan Poles pulled the trigger on Bradbury, is the scheme fit there and the price. He's only going to cost them, a 5th-round pick this season. Ryan Poles says not a very deep draft anyway, not worried about the 5th-round pick. And then against the salary cap, it's a $5.7 million is what Garrett Bradbury will cost the Bears this season. That is 11th. Or actually, it'll be 10th among centers once the Packers release Elton Jenkins. But that pales in comparison to the big contract that Connor McGovern just got, was $13 million a year. The center that just retired, Drew Dalman, was $14 million a year. Creed Humphrey is at $18 million a year. Cam Jurgens is at $17 million a year. There's talk that Tyler Linderbaum will get $17, $18, $19, $20 million a year. Garrett Bradbury is $5.7 million a year for this year. He's only under contract for one season. This is going to be his only year with the Bears. He's a bridge to get you to your next long-term center. He puts you in a position where you have a starter, and then you can still draft a center, but that drafted center doesn't have to start right away week 1 as a rookie. He can sit for a year and develop, or next offseason you can find your next new center. But this is a nice, I think, cheap bridge. It's a good scheme fit. It's not great. It's not a player to get super excited about, but he fills a hole ahead of free agency, so you're not bidding on a bit more expensive contract for an outside player. I think there's plenty of reason to be cautiously optimistic, but understandably cautious about Garrett Bradbury as well. He's the first addition of the offseason for the Bears at this point. Saw some subtractions as well over the weekend with Tremaine Edmonds being formally released. Obviously, the DJ Moore trade we talked about on Friday's podcast. And then they also re-signed Daniel Hardy and the retirement of Drew Dalman. So we'll take a look at what happened with Tremaine Edmonds, why he was released and not traded, and where this leaves the Bears from a salary cap standpoint as free agency gets rolling. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed's Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. The skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping that the right candidate stumbles across your post. Spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes. Less stress, less time, and more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Do want to thank you again for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, whether it's the first time you've ever listened or the 1,000th time you've tuned in. We really appreciate you making us a part of your day. If you want to take your listening to the next level, you can check out the Locked On Bears Everydayers Club. It's going to give you access to an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Bears. It's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the podcasting platforms. And you'll also get access to an exclusive listener group chat in the Locked On Bears Everydayers Club Discord server. If you want to check it out, we're going to give you a free month of Everydayers Club access if you use our promo code FREEAGENCY. The website to go to is lockedonbears.supercast.com, and that code FREEAGENCY will get you a free month of ad-free Locked On Bears and access to the Locked On Bears group chat in the Everydayers Club Discord. You can find that link in the show notes description wherever you are tuning in to the Locked On Bears podcast. But in addition to the Garrett Bradbury trade this weekend, it was also the non-trade of linebacker Tremaine Edmonds. The Bears made it clear that they were ready to move on. They gave Tremaine Edmonds permission to seek a trade. There were reported teams that had some interest in Edmonds, but ultimately no deal was struck. Edmonds was released, enters free agency, and the Chicago Bears save $15 million in salary cap space. And it's only slightly surprising that he was released because there were loose reports of potentially interested teams. Like, I think when the Bears granted him permission to seek a trade, my first thought was no one's going to trade for that $15 million contract. Like, he's the third highest paid center in the NFL right now. I don't think any team is going to want to pay him that. Fourth highest paid center. Or no, he was tied for third highest paid center with Zach Bond in terms of the average annual salary. So he's not going to get that much money again in free agency. And I suppose the team that traded for him only had to pay him $15 instead of the $17. So I guess there's $2 million in savings there. But the point is, as Tremaine Edmonds becomes a free agent, whatever team signs him next is not going to pay him $15 million. And all the teams that would have traded for Tremaine Edmonds knew that. And so it was like, do I want to give up a draft pick, even if it's a 7th-round pick? Is there a team that wants to give up a 7th-round pick to acquire Tremaine Edmonds and pay him more than they would have to pay him if they signed him as a free agent? Like, essentially, you're giving him more money and you're giving him a draft pick to ensure that he comes to your team as opposed to decides to sign somewhere else to some other team. But you can see where the math just doesn't quite add up unless there's just some team that happened to think Tremaine Edmonds is the stellar stud player that they need to put in the middle of their defense to solve all their problems and make their defense so much better. But as we saw in Chicago, there were just always limitations and shortcomings with Edmonds. It was never about him being a bad player. It was about him not being a $17 million a year player. Like, he still missed a few too many tackles and was still always, for being a large, strong, athletic freak at 6'5", 250 and runs a 4.5 40. Like, he has always had all the physical tools, but there's still just sometimes a delay in the processing, right? The instincts aren't quite there. Like, he's got the speed to make up for it when he's a step late, but he's running around a lot like a chicken with his head cut off out there. And the man is 28 years old. He's been in the league for like 8 seasons now, and it just hasn't quite ever clicked fully. Like, there are moments when he's right where he needs to be, and that's how he gets 4 interceptions this season. Makes some great plays in there, but over the course of a season when he's on the field for 959 snaps, those 4 interceptions are great, but the other 950 snaps aren't as special. And there's ups and downs throughout that whole process. But the point being is just he hasn't really been that truly special, dynamic game changer consistently enough that you want him to be, that you see he's physically capable of being, and that you are paying him to be. Like, if Tremaine Edmonds' contract was paying him, I mean, I don't know exactly the numbers, right? If it was paying him $10 million, he might still be a Chicago Bear. If it was paying him $5 million, he's for sure still a Chicago Bear. Like, he has value and is going to go be a starter somewhere else next season. But the price tag becomes a challenge there when you can use that $15 million elsewhere and still sign a replacement center to replace Tremaine Edmonds and have extra cash left over and get you a player that might be a Dennis Allen preference anyway and can be close to just as good, if not just as good, while costing you less money. And so ultimately that's what brings Tremaine Edmonds' Bears career to an end. He was a Matt Eberflus guy, not a Dennis Allen guy. And so the team moves on and Edmonds moves on and he'll start somewhere else next season. But when you combine that with the DJ Moore trade to the Buffalo Bills and then Drew Dalman's retirement as well, cleared up some salary cap space, all of a sudden the Bears have found some cap room to work with here. The numbers seems like a lot when you say it out loud at first, but functionally it's really not that much money. Like, I've seen people throw out Bears free agent wish list. It's like, oh, if they can get 2 of these guys and it's a bunch of big name players. The Bears have a lot more salary cap space now than they did a week ago, but they still don't have a ton. They may still make some additional moves here to free up more space as the free agent negotiating period begins. But the way it has gone, right? Last week, the Bears had about minus $7.2 million in salary cap space. They were about $7 million over the salary cap entering last weekend. Then Drew Dalman retires. That frees up $10 million in cap space. DJ Moore gets traded. That frees up $16.5 million in cap space. And then they release Tremaine Edmonds, and that adds $15 million in salary cap space. So just right there in those 3 moves, I'm no math major, but that's $41.5 million in cleared up, freed up space. Now you subtract that you were $7.2 million over, so you didn't fully gain $41 million in salary cap space, but you did free up a bunch of room. You would have gained, I guess, 41 minus 7 would be like $34 million in net salary cap space at that point. But then you trade for Garrett Bradbury. He costs $5.7 million against your cap. And then on Sunday, the Bears re-signed special teams defensive end Daniel Hardy to a 2-year deal. And his cap hit is going to be about $2 million this year. So all of a sudden, you've just used up almost $8 million in that new salary cap space you just acquired. And my math and over the cap's math, and I think Spotrac's math as well, leaves the Bears at about $26.5 million in salary cap space as I'm recording this Sunday night, following the re-signing of Daniel Hardy and the trade of Garrett Bradbury, but prior to any additional moves after that. $26.5 million seems nice. Oh, you could go out and get a big player, right? Well, think about how much we just went through with Bradbury and Hardy. Like, those are not big name players. Those are not flashy, exciting moves, or even moves you're all that excited about or happy about. But just a low-level starting center and a backup special teams defensive end cost you almost $8 million in salary cap space. The Bears are sitting at $26.5 million. If those 2 players took up 8, now you start to calculate that you need to sign 2 starting safeties, a starting linebacker to replace Tremaine Edmonds, plus, then do you want to get an edge rusher or a defensive tackle? Like, those things are all going to cost significant amount of money. If you give Kevin Byard $8 million, okay, boom, then you're down to $18 million in your cap space. Oh, also, you have to set away $5 to $7 million for your draft picks to sign them to contracts. So you take away that cap space already, and all of a sudden, you got very little money left. Plus, you got to sign backup safeties, backup linebackers, backup defensive line, backup offensive lineman, maybe another receiver for some depth there. The salary cap space is going to go really fast. The Bears don't have the money to sign Trey Hendrickson. They don't have the money to sign a top edge rusher. They don't have the money to sign the top of the market safeties. Like, Ryan Poles is going to create some more space in some other ways, but they're going to be frugal in free agency. We talked about some free agent targets that would make sense. We did a special late night Sunday bonus episode of Locked On Bears that you'll see in your podcast feed. So go take a listen to that if you haven't listened to it yet, for about 30 or 40 different names to keep an eye on as free agency gets rolling here. But this is also why they didn't trade for Max Crosby. They don't have a lot of salary cap space to trade for Max Crosby. Crosby goes to the Buffalo Bills instead. We'll take a look at some of the ramifications of that and where that leaves the Bears on the defensive line entering free agency next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Game Time. We live in a world where we can stream anything. You can order food in minutes, and you carry a supercomputer around in your pocket, and yet somehow buying tickets to a live game still feels complicated. Between hidden fees and jumping prices and endless steps, there has to be a better way, and there is. It's the Game Time app. That's why I have it on my phone, because it gives fans the advantage and makes getting tickets simple, whether it's NFL games, concerts, comedy, whatever you are into. I just used Game Time this past weekend to go see the band Too Many Zoos at a concert near me. I got my tickets through Game Time because I could see my seat, my view from my seat inside the app before I bought my ticket. And also they have all-in pricing so that there's no surprise fees at checkout that make your tickets cost way more than you thought they would. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. So the Bears didn't pull the trigger on Max Crosby after all. And if you are one of our everyday listeners here on Locked On Bears, you should not have been surprised. We have been talking for at least a month now about how a Max Crosby trade was unrealistic and unlikely, and maybe, dare I say, even unwise. But aside from the potential merit of the deal, it was always unlikely. Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson had signaled to us fairly regularly and consistently that, hey, they're not in a position to mortgage the future, to go all in on a big splash move like this just yet. They talk, especially Poles talked about like building sustainably. That yes, they want to make the roster better, and they're going to make moves to add talent to the roster. And whenever a truly elite special talent like Max Crosby becomes available, they're always going to inquire and explore and just find out, if the Raiders happen to have a reasonable price tag that wouldn't mortgage the Bears' future, then Crosby could have been a thing. But obviously, as it played out, the Raiders held firm on their asking price of 2 first-round picks. They got 2 first-round picks from the Baltimore Ravens, and the Bears and Ryan Poles were never going to give up 2 first-round picks. Even though they got the second-round pick for DJ Moore, even though they might get a high draft pick for Tyson Bagent, even though they might get 2 third-round picks for Ian Cunningham still at some point here in the coming days, 2 first-round picks is too valuable for Ryan Poles as he wants to continue to build this thing out sustainably. And so they pass on Crosby. I'm not going to say they're better for it because obviously Crosby would be a huge upgrade to this Bears team, but I think we should continue a similar expectation for the defensive end position, that not only did they not trade for Max Crosby, but I do not expect them to go spend any kind of significant money at the edge rusher position. It's not going to be a big name, expensive player. I suppose it could be a big name player if they're cheap, like if Cam Jordan comes over from the New Orleans Saints on a 1-year deal that's pretty cheap. I would qualify him as a big name, but it's not going to be an expensive contract. They're not going to give Trey Hendrickson $25 million a year or $30 million a year. They're not going to give Odafe Owa from the Chargers $20 or $25 million a year. They have a bunch of money and draft capital already sunk in the defensive end position. I think they're much more likely to make the bigger name signing a defensive tackle, because if you look at the roster right now, Ryan Poles talked about expecting Dio Dengbo back for training camp and thinking good things for him, expecting Shamar Turner back from training camp, said he was starting to settle in at the edge rusher position. So between Sweat, Odengbo, Shamar Turner, Austin Booker, and now you re-sign Daniel Hardy, you have 5 defensive ends under contract right now. You might only keep 5 on your 53-man roster. Probably 6 because they're going to use Odengbo as a defensive tackle sometimes and kick him inside. They're going to kick Shamar Turner inside at some point. But if you just look at the big picture numbers, you have 2 defensive tackles under contract right now. You have 5 defensive ends under contract right now. Which one of those positions do you think Ryan Poles is more likely to sign free agents at? The position where he has 2 or the position where he already has 5? I don't mean to be condescending there, but everyone is thinking that they're going to just go out and prioritize edge rusher in free agency. I think the draft, for sure, they're going to draft an edge rusher. But in free agency, they need bodies at defensive tackle. They've got bodies at edge rusher. I think they'll bring in some kind of defensive end. I'd be surprised if they did 0 at the position, but I can almost guarantee you it's going to be cheap, lower on the depth chart guy. They're not getting a new starter opposite Montez Sweat. That's Dio Odengbo. You might get a guy who rotates with Dio Odengbo, but they're more likely to re-sign a Dominique Robinson type of player. That's the kind of free agent I'm going to expect. A Dominique Robinson replacement. Someone who's going to cost $5 million or less is what I'm looking for. That's what I'm expecting at the edge rusher spot. Whereas defensive tackle, because all you have is Grady Jarrett and Javon Dexter right now, that might be a spot that they're more willing to spend a little bit more money. I don't think they're going to go out and give John Franklin Myers from the Broncos the big, $18-20 million a year contract that some people are projecting for him. I think it could be more like a cheap, older David Onyemata from the Falcons or Sheldon Rankins from the Texans. I think they might even do a couple of defensive tackles, a couple of cheap guys to give you some more depth there. I'm just not expecting huge splash signings there because, like we talked about, they got to sign 2 safeties. They got to sign a linebacker. At the end of the day, defensive line's a huge weakness, but you got starters there right now. You don't have starters at safety and linebacker. Those are going to have to be priorities first, and there's just not going to be a lot of salary cap space left to put a bunch of money into the defensive line. Now, draft picks, I want to see a tackle and an edge rusher in the draft, regardless of what you do in free agency. But free agency-wise, I just think we shouldn't get our hopes up too high that they're going to fix the D-line the way they fixed the O-line last year. I think it's going to be a much slower process, and I fear that they have a lot more faith in Odengbo and Turner being the real boost to the defensive line. When they come back for injuries, that's what's going to make the Bears pass rush better. It's going to be less about getting a huge big-name upgrade and more about, once these guys are healthy next year, they're all going to play better and they'll just naturally improve the pass rush. I don't agree with that, but I think that's how the Bears are going to approach it. Plus, rookies, they got 2 second-round picks now. They might get an extra third-round pick as well. So, they're going to have some draft picks here to add on the defensive line and some of these other spots. But the free agent frenzy is about to begin. Negotiation period opens today as this podcast comes out. I'm recording this Sunday night, so I'm sure by the time you're listening to this, the Bears will already have agreed to terms with tentatively agreed to terms with some kind of free agent player. Whoever they sign, we'll break it down for you right here on Locked On Bears. Heck, we may even jump in and do an emergency live podcast at some point on Monday if there's a big name that merits it. We also put out little YouTube shorts for breaking down the news on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook Reels as well. For when there was quick Bears breaking news that we don't need to jump into a whole podcast on, but just want to give a quick little update on. You can always find those on the Locked On Bears social media channel, so go check that out. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making us your first listen today. Be sure to check out the Everydayers Club and the promo code FREEAGENCY for a free month of ad-free Locked On Bears listening. LockedOnBears.supercast.com is the website to go there. Otherwise, you can keep tuning in the same way you always do. We're free and available on all platforms. And every time you tune into Locked On Bears, you're going to leave with another opportunity to bear down.